All right. Thank you so much, Peter, for taking the time. How are you doing?
I'm suffering from a cold, so my voice is disappearing. But for the rest, I'm fine. Thanks, Jonas.
Get well soon then. Yeah, maybe a little bit of context for this conversation. I had a chat with Peter about 2 weeks before I went to Schumacher College, and it helped me a lot in deciding if I actually want to go or not, because his work is quite connected to what we're doing there. Yeah, so would we maybe like to start with your background a little bit? What's your background professionally, and yeah.
Sure. So my background, I have been, after I finally finished university in the mid-90s of the previous century, I've been working in broadly speaking, the sustainability movement. First at civil society organizations, focusing very much on the policy environment of sustainability, UN policies, EU policies, policies at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD in Paris. After that, and that was very much focused on changing production and consumption patterns, especially in developed countries, and also looking at our trade policies and investment policies to see how they enabled or hindered the transition to a sustainable economy. I was also very much involved in responsible entrepreneurship. So how do companies behave? I then moved into the world of nature conservation at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Netherlands Committee. So that's very much focusing on biodiversity and safeguarding biodiversity. Maintained my focus on the role of the economy, of the role of businesses, especially in that process. After IUCN, I moved into banking, but into marketing and communications at a sustainable bank. And then after that, I became a consultant. I even had a brief company in selling sustainably produced products to consumers through festivals. I call that my midlife crisis. And I also did some consultancies. I was asked by the founder of the organization I currently direct, John D. Liu, if I wanted to join the supervisory board of this new initiative to build ecosystem restoration camps around the world, where young people in their gap year or after school could come and work to restore degrading ecosystems. And we actually started a first such initiative in Spain. But to continue about myself, next to this work in ecosystem restoration, in the Netherlands, I'm involved in what I would call multi-stakeholder processes. I chair an initiative for the pension fund sector to invest more responsibly. I chair an initiative to deal with labor circumstances in the natural stone sector for Flanders and the Netherlands. And I'm also the chair of a collective labor agreement negotiation for the housing corporation sector. So I keep being involved quite broadly, almost always focused on how to get multiple types of stakeholders involved in making our economy, our society more sustainable.
Thank
But
you
most
for
of my focus goes to ecosystem restoration these days.
and would you like to share what your original degree was, and also what made you then go from that into almost exclusively working on the topic of sustainability?
My degree is in international relations, or actually policy of international policy studies. So I have my master's in the work of international organizations, such as the UN. And in that sense, and my minor was in development policies. So it sort of is aligned. And my first job was working at and around United Nations processes in the EU, the OECD. That organization represented community-based organizations from, at that time, still the former Soviet Union, because this was 1996, 1997, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, North America, in these processes, focused on what was then called Agenda 21, which was the main outcome of the first World Summit on Sustainability. So basically, during my studies, I studied a bit about it, about policy in this field, but my first job brought me right in the middle of it, of the global policy development around sustainable development. And actually, the switch is, I started at the international environment, and now we're very much focused on the local processes, what's happening at farmer and community level. It's still an international organization, so we're all over the world, but we've moved away from the global policy level very much to the level of farmers and people living in communities.
Would you like to share a little bit more about that? What was your experience with working with more on an international level, policy level, and then
Yeah.
with farmers and with more grassroots organizations?
Well, at the international level, it was a lot of what I would call text work. So texts are being written. They could become international treaties, or they could just become international decisions, which governments would then say, we will try to do this, we will adhere to this. So a lot of work was trying to translate what's happening on the environment and at the policy level, but also what people are running into, to a level where international policy would then enable change. So an example is we had Russians living former nuclear waste treatment facilities, suffering from a lot of sicknesses. What can we do internationally to help improve those circumstances? That's sort of what we were focusing on. And it was, I would say, work in suits, with a tie and a nice jacket and a briefcase full of papers and a lot of meetings where you'd sit and discuss text. What I do now is I'm still behind it. I'm behind a desk. I'm no longer in that many meetings. But what we do now is trying to enable this work on the ground to happen with much more concrete measures. So we do fundraising. We have a knowledge exchange platform in place. We have a monitoring and evaluation framework in place. We have a few instruments in place to support these local communities do their work a little bit better than they did before they joined the movement. So it's very much tool-based, what I do now. Less enabling policy environment and much more, what do you need on the ground to get things done? So we're actively raising funds to have tree nurseries built, or we are actively developing a platform where these initiatives can find global expertise and also volunteers to come and join. So we're building a more concrete tool set in that sense. And we get asked often, should we not go to the big UN meetings around climate or biodiversity and have our perspective become part of these policy discussions? And probably there's wisdom in doing so, but that's a lot of work, I know from experience. And it's very far removed from the world on the ground. And what I've learned, so to speak, that the world internationally is far behind on what's going on the ground. At the beginning of the sustainability movement, a lot was driven by international policies. That's why the agreements were put in place that we are now trying to implement still. And now I see that there's a real bottom-up transition taking place to which policy is going to follow, especially in the world of farming and in the world of ecosystem restoration.
And so the work at ecosystem restoration communities, is that both focused on adaptation and on food security and on biodiversity, or what's your focus?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So my critique of the way we've sort of developed our world, how we do things, is that we think of things very compartmentalized. And life isn't compartmentalized. So what ecosystem restoration communities are doing, and you have to see, these are projects on the ground. Some by villages, some by farmers, some by people living in the community, trying to show to the rest of the community what is possible once you restore the environment and introduce regenerative agricultural practices. What it focuses on is the holistic approach. So for us, it's as much about climate resilience and climate adaptation, as much as biodiversity conservation, as much about water cycles, hydrological cycles, water retention, moisture in the soils, as much about soil quality. It's as much as about the ability to produce food and materials in a natural way. And it's as much as about about livelihoods and social cohesion. And it's also about personal development. Humans are natural beings, but we are living quite disconnected from the natural world. And understanding our role in ecosystems, if we understand that role of being a human being, Homo sapiens, in the natural world, it will enhance our ability to live sustainably, but it will also do something to you as a human being. It completes us a bit more than thinking that we're some sort of separate entity that may go to heaven after this, or we're, whatever happens to us, but that we're not of Earth. And we are of Earth, and in being involved in understanding how ecosystems function, that relationship is strengthened even further. So there's there's a whole bunch of dimensions, from climate adaptation to personal development. And this is also what we measure. Our monitoring and evaluation framework measures on the level of soil, which is an acronym for soil, is for us a proxy for the state of the environment. Souls, which is the individual, and society, which is what happens in the community or in society when that relationship with Earth is understood and maintained properly.
Thank you. Would you also like to share a little bit about your experience with indigenous forms of farming and what can be learned from that? Because some of what you just said seems quite aligned with some indigenous practices.
There's alignment with indigenous practices, but a lot of it is also pure academic science. We now understand much more of what goes on in soil systems and in tree systems. And, that's scientifically being shown. And it used to be to people a mystical experience because we couldn't see microlife, understand fungal networks. We didn't get those. We didn't understand them. So what indigenous knowledge often, not always, did do is see when the natural system would react badly to interventions. There was more of an astuteness and more of an affinity with understanding the change in the natural system. But I would venture to argue that the Neolithic revolution, 15,000 years ago, which I would say is part of the problem we're in right now, when we started planting stuff and holding animals, and that grew into what now is large monocultural systems, that's also indigenous knowledge. And that Neolithic revolution, it brought us some good. I mean, our population grew, but also brought us quite some bad. I mean, because of the Neolithic revolution, we could no longer move, so we needed to get soldiers to fight each other so that our land would not be threatened. Gave us a lot of crap. There's a really good book about this, which is Pandora's Paradigm by Spencer Wells. It's a really good book. It's now 2 decades old, but it showed how genetic in our genome, you can sort of see how our quality of life became worse after the Neolithic revolution. Anyway, so Neolithic indigenous knowledge is important. There's a lot of knowledge about how systems work, but there's also a lot of knowledge not in indigenous knowledge because you need the microscopes and the scientific method that we have developed to really understand what's going on in the system. But at least say that the system is more respected. And there's a lot less arrogance about our ability to rule the system or to overcome the system or to manage the system, because the system is so complex, we have no idea what we're doing. And that's exactly the impact what we're seeing. Monoculture, industrial, so-called highly efficient agriculture is literally killing soils, is literally degrading systems, ecosystems, it's draining our water supplies, and is actually part of the reason why we're experiencing some enhanced climate change problems. So that's us thinking we know better. And what I think the big revolution of today is in agriculture is that we're learning that, nature at its most controlled, which is our current agriculture system, is a terrible idea. And nature at its most natural is a good idea. And if we can mimic natural systems in our agriculture, we have a better chance of creating abundance, overcoming climate change problems, food security, all those issues you mentioned. So that's, I think, the big shift we're in right now, where it's no longer science dictating what agriculture does or science dictating how we treat our natural areas, but people discovering other routes and science trying to understand why that has become better. And a large part of that is indigenous knowledge, but it's also, there's some incredible pioneers in agriculture who figured out wiser systems. Homo sapiens, wise human. Some wiser humans figured out new ways of agriculture that work much better. And those are modern individuals. It's modern thought, modern ideas. Syntropic farming, the whole permaculture movement, the sort of the polyculture agriculture is also developed with modern techniques. And it isn't just indigenous knowledge.
I really resonate with that. I would also say that's what Schumacher College is trying to do in a way, integrating indigenous traditional knowledge with modern science, and also not separating the human world from the natural world in a way.
I visited, right? I visited Schumacher College. We were hosted by a woman called Anna Selby. I don't know if she's still there, but if it's last year, so she's probably still here. And she showed us around, so I understand what Schumacher is doing. It's a very interesting school. Yeah.
Amazing. What I'd also be curious to, it seems that your approach very much it isn't a conservation approach in the sense that you create isolated natural environments that are devoid of any human influence, but you have your worldview seems to see humans as part of the natural world, and in that sense also humans being able to live along with other than humans in a somewhat constructive way. And I've also read that the biodiversity in the Amazon is partly as high because the Amazon has been, I don't know if agriculture is the right word, but it has been actively managed by the indigenous population there. It's not, it is a natural environment, but it is not an environment not impacted by humans. And I find that really fascinating. And yeah, if you have any thoughts on that.
Even in European forests, you find spots where there's tree species there that's been there for centuries, but that should not be there. They're not endemic in that sense. So they were brought there by humans, usually tree species that produce foods. Northern Europe has a lot of apple orchards, but it's a Kazakh product. It was brought here a very long time ago by people who wanted apples. So you're right. And I think, we're going to live on a globe, on a planet with probably 11 billion people. I think we need fully natural areas. We need to have that full biodiversity, also because we don't fully understand yet how the system operates. And every single time we pull out a species because we let it go extinct, I think we're weakening the fabric of life. But I think it is our mission to if we see ourselves as natural beings, to also see the evolution of the system due to our intervention as a natural process. And again, precaution is crucial here. The precautionary principle is crucial here. You could argue, can we live in a planet without mosquitoes? I would hope so. I hate mosquitoes, but what role do they really play? I don't know, but there must be a question. There must be an answer to that. Are they a vital part of our system? What role do tigers really play in the system, other than being a top predator? And can we replace that role? I mean, here in the Netherlands, the wolf has returned, to the great chagrin of sheep herders, sheep holders, because a lot of sheep are being killed. Less than dogs are killing, but we're angry about nature killing our animals. But the Netherlands has been without wolves for 200 years. Is it terrible that it's not here? It's nice that it's here. It shows that our nature is becoming more healthy. But, I think those are questions that ethical people need to figure out. But the reality is we'll be with 11 billion. And I think it's not ethical to say that a few billion of those cannot have access to food or land or any means of existence because, sorry, that's just where nature is to be. So, yeah. And this is a slippery slope because forest systems, purely natural forest systems, provide us with oxygen, the hydrological cycle, all those things that are crucial. So it's an unclear question, but just the idea that nature is there for nature and humans should not be there. It's true when it's all very fragile, but if, for example, our agricultural system becomes more natural, more agroecological, there's a good chance that our natural systems will become more robust also. An example, in the southern Italy, farmers completely aligned with the school of production increase, continuous increase of production, have basically removed all natural areas. All forests have been cut and they have been replaced with barley and grain fields. And now that system is collapsing. And some farmers have started to replant forests on some of the hills, reforest hills, and their production is improving again. So there's a clear relationship with having a forest system with a production system. And I would argue, I hope their next step would be to go to a polyculture instead of just a monoculture. But that's later on. We're now seeing that those areas where natural systems have been removed for maximum agricultural production, and then followed by, after 20 years, the collapse of those systems, that once they start to reintroduce nature in that region, life improves and agriculture improves again, hence showing there's a great symbiotic relationship with natural areas, and that there is a business case for having some of your land go to nature. The result will be more nature with an economic interest to maintain it. And this is all new insight, right? This is a new insight that it actually does work. So maybe there will be more nature, which will reduce the need for national parks and screened off areas, because we will have nature go through all our systems, because we know it's very crucial for the success of our agricultural systems. Maybe that will be a result, and it will just sort of naturally become a much more robust system.
Yeah, and if you want to share anything about the role of technology in that also, because as you said, like we have, or as I understood it, we have changed nature. Nature is not the same anymore as it was even 500 years ago, and also with climate change, there is and there will be in the future some sort of temperature increase, and what is native to a place will not be native, or will not be able to be grown at that place anymore in the future in some cases. And
already that's happening in parts of the world.
Exactly. And so there is like there's a planetary transformation. And what do you think is the role of technology, of course, in causing that? It's pretty clear that the Industrial Revolution and so on, but in also mitigating that, or in supporting that, for example, AI or
I don't know about AI. I'm too old to get that bit. But no, one thing is for sure, we need to shorten the carbon cycle. And currently we use a very long carbon cycle. We're pumping up 300 million year old carbon and emitting it within a day. And that's, so we need to get rid of fossil fuels. And that's just, there's no other route that needs to end. I mean, to replace that with renewable resources or short cycle carbon like biomass or biofuels, if we have to stay with fuels. Current battery market, we're going to run out of resources for batteries in no time. So that does not have a future. We need technology will replace some of these technologies that we're currently using, and we need that really to take place. We need to move from a non-renewable economy to a renewable economy. We need to move from a non-biological economy to a fully biological economy. And how you make phones with organic materials, nobody knows. Maybe 200 years from now we will, but right now we have no idea. So that's very much sci-fi, that everything is grown on a tree, so to speak, or on a plant, or it's a fungal system that replaces some of these things. Maybe energy is made by mimic mitochondria in telephones. I have no idea. That's going to be a technological change that we have to have if we want to continue to have personal mobility, the personal communication capacity, the ability to work on computers, the IT systems. That's all non-renewable technology based. We're going to run out. Not in the next 20 years, probably 200-300 years from now. So somewhere that we need to figure out how to replace. And you can recycle a long time, but there's something in physics called entropy. The quality of materials will degrade and degrade, and you'll be out. Although I understand that aluminum can be recycled forever if you do it properly. So maybe that's wrong. Maybe we can figure out how to recycle products forever and ever and ever. That's also a technological improvement. Will AI help us? Sure, if it's used for the right purposes. I mean, right now there are systems online where you use satellite imagery and coordinates, and this system tells you which plants. It'll know which climatic conditions are there and which plants are likely to survive. Which plants are a good idea, as close to endemic as possible. That already exists. It's all automated. Giant databases, knowledge about climatic conditions. So you could look into these plants. That's 10 years ago, that nobody would have known that. Maybe some academics would have some idea, but there would not be a structural thing where you literally take the system to where you are and say, okay, which plants belong here, and it'll tell you. I think that's fascinating. Remote sensing is fascinating anyway, because it also helps us find water spots. It helps us understand contours and potential watershed systems. So there's a lot there that technology brings us when it comes to restoring the natural environment, and that we all use. It makes it also accessible to lay people. When you can use Google Earth to figure out the contour lines of your land, so that you can properly plan water retention systems. You used to have to be able to be a surveyor or figure out how you could follow the contour of a hill using a rope, a little string, level, and poles. Now you can just go to your computer, zoom in on your land, and it'll tell you what the lines are. And then all you have to do is mark them out with the map in your hand. That's fascinating. That's technology. And it makes it very easy for everyone to start to use it, to do these steps. If you know that it's wise to plant your stuff in such a way that it's basically on the contour line of a hill, and you'll have much more water retention, and it will improve the health of your plants. Everyone will start doing it. It will make very weird gardens, but it will be better. Anyway, that I think is fascinating. But in the end, our future depends on plant life and on fungal systems and maybe even animal life. So I guess it requires a deeper insight on how these systems work. We don't know half yet. We haven't even mapped all species on this planet yet. Yeah, if you want to call that technology, that's a non-spiritual look at life. That's perfectly possible. Yeah.
Also, connected to the question of technology, we currently we're somewhat in an exponential population growth, and we will most probably continue that in some way, but of course can't exponentially increase forever. But I'd also be curious to hear about your opinion on population size, also with decreasing carrying capacity, with degraded soil, and with increasing climate change. So if you maybe could first give a little bit of an overview of the current ecological situation, and then also, what your view is on population.
Yeah, so if we leave everything as is, 45 years from now, we will no longer be able to harvest any food. So significant culling of mankind will take place. Billions of us will die. If we leave climate change unchecked, it will become unlivable. Already, according to James Hansen, who is the godfather of climate science, we're already in a 5-degree scenario, which is, that's almost humanity ending level. So the 1.5, he says, is way behind us. We can get there. We can still get there, but over a very long cycle. And in that very long cycle, a lot of people will suffer. And that's the current scenario. And that's just the truth. We have fucked it up and are continuing to screw this up. I mean, the European Commission just retracted some of the most important measures in greening agriculture because of a bunch of tractors on highways. It's short-sighted cronyism and terrible for society. So right now, there's very little reason to believe that humanity will save itself. And I'm friends with someone who is a member of the Club of Rome. The big ignored element still is natural resources, from rare earths to the metals we use in batteries. All that's running out at a very rapid pace. So even our current computer, mobile phone technology systems, we're not going to be able to maintain it very long if we don't fix this. If we don't fix circularity, we still throw 80% of 90% of what we make away within a very short, brief use time. Phones, people keep them for 2 years, which is when their contract ends, and then replace them, even though the phone's still fine. So that's still the path we're on. And then I would say within 30 years, 4 or 5 billion people will starve to death, or there will be war and maybe more people. And 50 years from now, so when you're 81 years old, you're likely to witness our extinction as a species, or some of us survive in some sort of post-apocalyptic world. Good luck. That's if we do nothing. Yeah, humanity ending. That's the scenario we're in. The beauty of it is when I saw John Hughes' film about the transformation of the Loess Plateau, this was in 2009, And the scenarios I just sketched were then also real scenarios. And then I realized, we can turn this around, and it's relatively easy. It doesn't require major technological advances. It requires us to get to work, plant trees, restore water cycles. Basically, basic recipe is make soils permeable so that water goes through it and not over it, eroding everything. Stop water flows when you can't make it permeable so that it stays. Revegetate, restore soil health, make sure fungal and microlife can flourish, and introduce these natural areas again so that biodiversity and nature in itself can thrive. And you will see that instead of being on a pathway of desertification, we can regreen and be on a pathway of natural abundance. That's what that movie showed. And it blew my mind. It changed the sustainability paradigm from nothing but more and more scarcity and us having to live on a tiny bit of ecological footprint area and a squeezed in little box below Kate Rayworth's ceiling, environmental ceiling, and above the social floor, and then having a reduced fair and just space. All people get 1.8 hectares now. Mine, I think, is 5 hectares, my footprint. Yours is probably 2. You're skiing. Terrible. So yeah, that's a paradigm where people are like, what the hell? I don't want that. So either deny or just say, well, what the hell with it? I'm not going to do all this. And even the most environmental people probably not getting their footprints underneath 1.8 hectares, because it means you do nothing with what we can currently do. You don't travel, you don't eat much. You certainly don't get on the internet to get your footprint there. So it's also an impossible task. And then that movie showed that the paradigm is actually abundance. It's not more scarcity. It's actually, if we do what's needed to get sustainable, we can create more abundance. We grow that box. We move the ceiling further up and the floor further down. And if you then combine it with circularity and trying to have natural resources last as long as possible, you're really creating abundance. And that means 11 billion people can live on this planet quite well for long, probably until the planet itself ends, which is very certain to happen when the sun ends being a star. So that's a major shift. So if we are successful in creating that abundance, the future scenario will be we'll have a temporary spike in temperature, but because we've regreened more, microclimates will be cooler. We'll have the water cycle functioning properly, so we won't go thirsty, and we'll have food supplies in much more abundance than we used to have. In Brazil, some of the polyculture farms following the syntropic model, are reporting a factor 100 increase in production. That factor 100 is compared to the highly industrial soil production next door. He produces 100 times more usable commercial biomass than the very industrial monoculture soy plantation. If you think about it, a factor 100, we're currently with 7 billion. Okay, some people are hungry. It's more a distribution problem than our ability to feed people. We can, but we don't distribute it properly. We're eating fruits from Ethiopia here, where there's a current hunger crisis. Famine, that's stupid, but that's the way it is right now. But multiply what we can currently do with a factor 100. Let's be conservative. Factor 10. Theory, 80 billion people. And we won't go there because there will be a moment, as demographers tell us, at 11 billion will plateau and it'll go back down a bit. We should be fine. But it does mean that we need to get to work. And it does mean that we need to stop thinking everything will be fine without changing the way we do things. And that's still how many people think, the majority. So what I like about, for example, what ecosystem restoration communities are doing, these are people who are convinced change is needed. They're implementing those changes, and they're showing what quality of life improvement that brings. More food, more material, higher quality of life, better local climates, etc. All that is being shown. And what does that do? Neighboring communities are saying, how did you do that? What did you do? And can I do that too?
Mm.
So in Guatemala, one village stopped the old-fashioned slash and burn agriculture. You burn the forest and you plant corn or something else neatly in rows, and you sell the corn. A dwindling market, under pressure, input-based, global market, so price pressures, not financially sustainable, not good for the people that live there, and they were going hungry, but also the forests were cut. So there was erosion, there was more flooding, and it actually got uncomfortable. So some people said we need to change this, and they introduced agroforestry measures. This is 5 years ago, and this is in the tropics, so those forests grow very fast. And now it's 160 villages doing that. 160 villages who are copying these measures. That's amazing. That's so fast. The example in Italy, it started at one farm, now it's 11, 12 farms even that are doing this. In Egypt, in the Sinai Desert, one of the driest places on earth, used to be very green. One farm went to regenerative agriculture, saw a huge drop in water use and a huge increase in yield. Now it's 80. So what you see is that this abundance, promise of abundance, proven that it's real in a local circumstance, is very rapidly reaching others. And in Egypt right now, the government is saying, let's make this policy. We see that this is happening. Let's make sure all of our farmers go in this direction because it will bring us more food, a better ecological system, more rain, less heat, etc. And I hope to see that in multiple places around the world. So that these local pioneers are going to lead the way, more people will follow, and then you'll see the system change. Here in the Netherlands right now, agro-industrial enterprises are still winning, but more and more farmers are changing the way. And that group is growing and growing and growing. And they're also building the business models that are showing that their profit margins are much higher. Without, by the way, charging premium prices. So it's not like they're charging extra to the consumer. It's the same price as the mainstream monoculture farmer is doing, but their margin is like sevenfold higher. Sevenfold higher, huh? That's their profit margin. Every single farmer will say, I want 7 times more profit also. But apparently I need to change my agricultural system then. And that can be taught. How do you do that?
That's really fascinating. What I was wondering, given that many of the issues we have currently today are also a symptom of colonialism and of a globalized economic system in a way, how do we ensure that this transition will be socially just, especially as the global south, which is economically but also ecologically more impacted from the coming challenges in
but they're also leading the way today. I think most of the innovations are actually coming from the global south. So you may see a reversal. Colonialism and the patterns that are there and the trade patterns. I mean, if you produce ethereal oils, there's only one way you can sell them to the global market, and that's through Paris. Why? Because Paris used to have the colonial trade monopoly on perfumes. If you want to do cacao, you go through Amsterdam. That's all still true. Hey, the system is not changed yet. What's happening, and this is where I think the non-colonial aspect comes here, is that it's locally initiated. So this is people changing their own system. Most of these farmers used to be subsistence farmers and trading a little bit with the global market. So their subsistence situation is improving and their surplus can now be sold. But the market isn't even set up for polyculture farmers. The market is fully set up for monoculture farmers. Trading systems are not set up for polyculture farmers. They're set up for monoculture farmers. I know in Africa, for example, a lot of people talk about this, governments are investing in production facilities. It used to be just raw materials on a big cargo ship brought to Europe where it's then transferred into a product. More and more is taking place there. So that's changing, but slowly. Will restoration and these regenerative agroecological enterprises change the global system? They're going to be part of the change, simply because of the different way that they do stuff. And also, I think of us as one humanity. And I know that's kind of unique. I'm not a nationalist. I'm certainly not a nativist. Somewhere, I hope we remain a global society. But I agree, there's injustices in the system, severe injustices in the system that need to be resolved. But not one person can resolve all of them. If you want to go resolve that, let's go do it. I'm going to focus on getting more and more people to switch to new systems of agriculture and restoring natural systems in the process. I think that's what we need to focus on, because those are degrading. And once we get those back up and running, local economies will thrive. Things could change.
I really resonate with that, especially as you like empathize. This approach also strengthens local, like it's grassroots based. It enhances people's livelihood. So that's amazing. Maybe as
and what I think, Jonas, I think these new enterprises will replace the old enterprises. So I don't think there's a future for Unilever, because Unilever is too big to change. But there will be new trading companies, new production companies that fit in this new market. You see the same in clothing. The old giants in clothing keep exploiting labor. There are new companies emerging that are treating labor like human beings properly and looking at ecological, making sure that their products fulfill ecological needs. Prices are currently much higher because of that, because the only way to reduce prices is to exploit labor. But that's changing. And I think the companies who built their whole earning model on exploitation and on exhaustion of natural resources, they will be replaced. And that will be the new system. And the policy environment will follow. I mean, you see right now here in the Netherlands, the government decided to reduce the number of flights to Schiphol Airport, because there's, we're a tiny country and there's a huge amount of noise and pollution coming from that airport. And it's actually the United States government who took the Dutch to court because US airlines wanted to continue to fly on Amsterdam. That's, so there will be resistance, there will be a fight, but slowly but surely, that new economy will win. Also because these old companies built their entire system on a way of production that is actually collapsing.
And also there's a huge shift. I see it in young people. There's especially like in more privileged, or for example, I'm from Bern, from Switzerland, and we're quite privileged, but there's a huge shift in how we approach these topics. Which
the statistics are not on your side.
Is it not? Okay.
There's research done annually on value patterns with young people. And the environmentally conscious group amongst youth is actually shrinking. It's less. It's decreasing.
That's concerning.
When I saw it, it's like, oof.
That's
Maybe
as a little bit of an ending, would you like to share some what gives you hope in this work? Are not amazing.
1 village to 160 villages in 5 years, that gives me hope. 1 farm to 80 farms in 2 or 3 years, that gives me hope. And I think, honestly, until we realize what regenerative agriculture can do, until we realized how the interaction with healthy natural systems even further enhances that, and that's something we've just realized in the last 10, 15 years, and it's really coming up now. That paradigm for sustainability is changing. And it is that change from scarcity to abundance that's going to speed this up very, 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 very much.
Thank you so much, Pieter, for your time, and I hope you get well soon.
Me too. Jonas, enjoy your time at Schumacher. I thought it was a wonderful place. And enjoy your search for solutions. And find a place where you can have some success in being part of the solution. The whole solution, none of us can do on our own. It's going to be a system. Everything is a system. So you'll be fine.
Thank you so much.